Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Coffee with John. Looking forward to talking with Travis Hahler. Travis, it's great to connect with you. You are the Senior Director of Global Strategy and Transformation at Salesforce. Prior to that, you were with Google for 5 years as Global Change and Transformational Lead. And you're also the founder of the Neurological Nomad. As well as the author of the book, Rethink Resistance. All right, well, lots to dive in and talk about. I appreciate you for being on the show, Travis. Thank you so much. I want to talk about one of my favorite books for a long, long time is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And The War of Art talks about that as human beings, we resist what we need to do most. And it's a great concept. You kind of define the word resistance, and I thought it was a brilliant, brilliant book, and it had a big impact on me. So I was really intrigued when your team reached out about your book, which is titled "Rethink Resistance," and you know your angle on it is embracing neuroscience to lead transformational change. And so as we unpack kind of the art and the science behind resistance, what's the lens of how someone can kind of think at it from a neuroscience standpoint, and what can they actually do intrinsically to create that change?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, John. So Rethink Resistance, I like to say I wrote it because I hear leaders all the time say, why won't people just change? Right. And that's what I work in every single day. So I hear it all the time. But the core idea of the book is really simple. Resistance isn't rebellion, it's biology. And what I mean by that is that when people push back or they silently kind of revert to their old ways of working, it's not because they're being difficult. It's because their biology, their neurology is stopping them. And there's actually 6 predictable barriers in your kind of neurological self that create difficulty with change. And it's kind of the way we're wired. And so Rethink Resistance is all about that. It's all about reimagining the way that we've kind of been taught about resistance and how leaders typically react to and think about resistance within their own teams. And really how, instead of asking, how do I overcome resistant people? It's what's the resistance telling me about what these people need to get through this.
What do they need? What are some of those 6? Give us some insight onto those 6 things.
Absolutely. So the 6 things, and I'll just give you a couple examples. So within our brains, we work in patterns and repetitive tasks and habits, right? We all know that. We build habits, whether they're good or bad. It's one of the main barriers to people's ability to change. It really comes down to we've built a habit that's hardwired that helps us be efficient, effective. And when you're asked to change, you actually have to abandon those habits to build new habits. And as anyone can attest to, trying to build a new habit is not easy. And it's oftentimes, something we fail at as humans because we revert back to what's easy rather than what's difficult. And so that's one of the main neurological barriers to change that we have as people. And so when leaders think about resistance, it's different when you say, oh, that person's just being resistant, instead saying, wow, I wonder how much of a change this is for their habits, and have we given them the support or the time to actually rebuild that habit?
So let's talk about the onboarding of that. But I want to first talk about, I think it's pretty common to, and I'm giving just kind of a quick broad stroke example here, but hey, we're going to bring in X, we bought Y, we're going to use this software, it's going to save everybody 1 hour a day, decrease stress. Yet some people really can't adopt it, right? So, and no matter how sometimes big the benefit is, it's hard. I think Salesforce is actually, I know you work for Salesforce, but I think Salesforce is a really good example. Companies will buy Salesforce for people, but then to get them to actually use it and then use it consistently is really a challenge.
It is. It really, really is.
Yeah. So like, how do you get people, like, what are the pain points that really get people to really change?
So leadership support is probably one of the largest indicators of a successful change and it being adopted by people. And that's really where the book comes from is trying to build the understanding within leaders of what's happening in their people so they can bring, I call it the backpack of support when I'm talking to leaders. You can bring your backpack that has all the ways that you can support your people through it. So a couple of things that are critical when you're going through change as a leader of people needing to change is truly anchoring in communication, being transparent and frequent in that, understanding the loss that all change is equivalent to. So you can't make any change without losing something or giving something up. And then just simply acknowledging both the time and effort required for someone to leave behind habits and competence and rebuild that in a new way of working. And I think the CRM example is a really, really good one. We see it show up often where sales teams don't necessarily actively resist it. You don't see them saying, we're not going to use the new CRM. What you see is that they might use it, but they're also keeping on the side the spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
That they're like, this is actually my source of truth. I just lift and load it into the CRM when I get a chance.
Right.
And so that's, I think, one of the biggest things for leaders is one, showing up with the support and then understanding what resistance even looks like, which in the CRM case, it's not active. You don't actually see people saying, I won't use it. You see them actually kind of reverting and staying on the side and being quiet about the things that they're still doing and the legacy ways of working.
Well, right, because they don't want corporate to know that they're not using it. So they use it kind of the minimal, right?
Right.
Not just Salesforce. I mean, so many tools, we could layer in a lot of the AI tools and, a lot of tools are coming into people's world right now, and you just kind of like back up into some statistics. I've heard it takes about 18 months for someone to change their mind, and then it takes, anywhere from 21 days. I've heard now studies 3 months to build a habit. But to unpack, let's talk about how to undo a habit and then slowly replace it, and what your research shows as far as the onboarding is, because there's onboarding as a group, but the real magic really happens one-on-one, and that could take some time. And so when you reset expectations of managers and leaders to roll out anything new, what does that look like? Give a little master's class on the rollout, because I think some people think, shoot an email, have a 1 hour workshop, do another one in 30 days, and then they expect everybody to use it. That's not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a recipe for non-adoption, right? I think the biggest thing when I talk to leaders, and the book lays out the 6 barriers, it lays out, some pretty, I would say, deep dives into what each of those barriers represent and how you can actually overcome each of them. The beauty of it, in my mind, is that you don't have to do all 6 of the ways to overcome those barriers. It's really about starting somewhere and figuring out what works for your team. So when I talk to leaders, I talk to them about, here's the most frequent things that people really struggle with that leaders have control over. And the first one is how we communicate. And you made a great point. The typical is we shoot off the email and we say, here's what's happening. Here's the time when we're going to all train on it. And then we'll be done and everyone will adopt it and we'll go on our merry way, right? But the reality of how people take in change is such that they need to hear it more frequently, to your earlier point on the statistics. And then they also need to know that there is transparency in that and that there's opportunity in that. So as a leader, really rethinking how you go about communicating. And what I tell our leaders a lot is, it might seem silly, but having a set time when you're going to talk about this change, whether that's, a weekly huddle, bi-weekly, whatever that looks like, maintaining that as a cadence actually does 2 things. 1, it gives you a platform to talk about it. But 2, it helps your people internalize that there is a platform to ask questions and a place to go when they have them. Because without that, all that's left is ambiguity. And when people sit in ambiguity, who's the first person they call? It's not their leader and it's not the person who's doing the change. It's their friend, right? And so those 2 people start to create a dialogue and a narrative and a story that may or may not be true. So onboarding, the first thing I always talk about is how are we communicating and how are we making sure that this is frequent and transparent.
It's great. But then how do you keep, I think the next, if I'm listening to this and I'm a leader or a manager, I'm thinking, how often do I need to then do the follow-up? One thing I suggest to people is a people pipeline. You really want to know where each person is, no differently than you do a deal. And you're tracking that person, not micromanaging, but tracking to understand how to guide them to what to do now, what to do next, how to adopt it, and to really, excuse me, customize it to that specific person. So, for some people, it's like to me, I always kind of compare it to crossing the chasm, right? It's a book by Geoffrey Moore, and you have the early adopter, the innovators and the early adopters, the chasm, and then the late majority, the laggards, et cetera. And so, it could take upwards to 3 to 6 months to get someone to adopt, if not longer. And so how do you suggest people keep on coming back to the same person, right? That's what I would think the listener would be thinking right now. How do I go back to the same person for 6 to 8 months to get them to adopt it without micromanaging them?
Yeah. And that's one of the big fears that I hear from leaders often, is that they feel like either they are micromanaging, or, they're almost becoming too prescriptive with their people, or they're afraid to become too prescriptive. And so, one of the things that we've talked about for, I don't know, the better part of a decade probably is something along psychological safety. And I think that need, or that feeling that you're micromanaging, actually comes from the fact that we haven't built some of that psychological safety within our teams, where people feel comfortable raising how they truly feel about a change, right?
Yeah.
And so it takes some time. So the first few, goes at change as a leader, you're probably not going to get people telling you what they need. So you have to pull that out of them. And I would say it's more of a seek to understand rather than a go to them and say, okay, this is what I need you to do next. It's more of a, we know that our outcome is over here. We know that we need to adopt this system. Where are you at right now? Like, how do you feel about, do you feel like you've got the training that you need to understand it? Or do we have a gap there? Okay, we're good with the training. Do you feel like you need more information? Is there anything I need to tell you more about or get more information on? It's starting to seek to understand kind of where they're feeling and creating that space where they can truly come to you eventually and start to tell you what they need. But again, that takes a few rounds of that trust building to know that, okay, if I do this, it isn't going to paint me as a difficult employee, that, I'm saying, oh, I just don't feel like I have enough training. That's not going to have negative consequences.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about Salesforce. You hold on, I just want to go. I've lost my place here. Oh, here we go. So Senior Director, Global Strategy and Transformation, and at Google you were Global Change and Transformation Lead. Lots of change going on in the world today. AI, people resist, many don't. What does global transformation look like today? I mean, how do you define that today versus even 2 years ago? I think it has two totally different meanings.
It is, and it certainly does with the rise of AI. I would say 2-3 years ago, you talk about transformation, it was more around initiatives. It was more around, how are we restructuring? How are we, creating new operating rhythms or models? How are we launching new programs to our organization? It was very programmatic in nature. Today, with AI, it's less about program and more about behavior, mindset, innovation. And innovation's always been there, but it's been kind of underpinned by, I would say, programs.
Yeah.
And today it's like, we want the individual to be innovative. And that's a completely different territory, especially for most, individual contributors within large corporations. It can be kind of scary to have your company saying like, oh, we want you to innovate. Well, what does that mean? How do we do that? So a lot of what transformation means today is helping people understand what it means to innovate, what it means to play. That's a completely new term for a lot of our folks. And then what it means to, understand the tool in a way that helps you do your job better. It's not even always about creating, something reusable for the whole team. Sometimes it's just simply about you playing with it as a partner, as a coworker almost. And that's very different from what we've ever done before.
I want to talk about, because I think part of the formula of global strategy transformation, part of it is silence and being bored, which I think is really hard for people. Taking a pause and seeing a pause and silence and wandering and, doing nothing as strategy work, right? Giving your brain a vacation to allow things to just kind of be. And so what role does that play moving forward? Especially to younger generations who there's so much noise and it's hard for them to put down their phones. There's a lot of creative ideas, I think, getting lost in the noise.
There are. And I think that's why we're having such an interesting turmoil moment where, with the rise of AI being more of the transformation in the moment, people aren't used to being that creative in the moment and saying, oh, I'm going to step back and really just kind of rethink everything and see how it all works. And so I think you're absolutely right. The thing for me, when we're really looking at how do we create that space and that innovation, I think it comes down a lot to leaders and creating the safety to do that. Whether that, I just talked to a team a couple weeks ago where a leader said, okay, I've got 10 people. How do I give them the time and space to even play, to even think about what it could be, what it could mean? And, we talked about a couple of different ways. The first was, do you want it to be something that your whole team does together? Do you want them to kind of find things as a team that you want to surface? Or is this more of an individual aspect? And for him, it was more individual. He had a team of 10 that they all kind of did unique things. It wasn't something where it was everyone kind of doing the same thing. And so, we talked about, okay, is there a way that everyone can kind of get a portion of the week where they could really disconnect and almost like they had a almost out of office moment where, okay, John's going to be out Monday afternoon. And the whole purpose of John being out for those 4 hours is that John's just going to sit back and look at his workflows and see, what's causing him pain. Where's the moments that could be improved, or, what could we stop doing that might be creative and different than what we've been thinking about because we're just executing work.
Yeah.
And that's been really an interesting conversation with leaders. How do we give space?
Yeah. It's big. It's important. I mean, I think that's going to be a big piece. I'd like to talk a little bit about Google. I think, one of the things, every time Google seems to come up into a conversation, somehow, they talk about the interview questions that you get at Google. I'm just curious if any stick out to you that you had and or you asked when you were working at Google.
Yeah, Google's known for their interview process. I think it used to be maybe a little more wild, kind of in the very beginnings. Right. I remember stories that they would put like codes on billboards, and basically, if someone could solve the like riddle, it would show them like where they could apply. So I think there was like in the early 2000s, there's some really interesting kind of out there things.
But right, there was one I heard of, like if you're caught in a blender or something crazy like that. So what were some of the questions that you asked or you got asked?
Well, I remember as I was preparing for the interview, the recruiter at the time said there'll be one interview that's going to be a little out there, and it's going to really be cognitive, and it's going to be a problem that you have to solve. And that was really all they could give me, was like, here's kind of what it entails. And I remember mine very vividly. I think if you ask any person who's worked at Google what theirs was, they probably remember it because it was a little off the wall. So mine was about setting up a chocolate shop in the city of Chicago, what would you do if that was what you had to, if you owned a coffee or owned a chocolate shop and you were going to set one up in Chicago? What would you do? And really, it was about thinking through, okay, how do we get to the location? How do we figure out where it should be located? How do we get to a price point? How do we determine that? What inputs do we need? How do we make those decisions? And, it was really a 30-minute conversation, just like continuing to dive and poke and say, oh, $4 a chocolate bar. What if that's too expensive for me? Well, here's some options of like how we can market that differently. Like what makes the chocolate different? So it was really about, it had nothing to do with the answers, right? Like there was no right answer to that question. But the reality of it was really seeing how I was thinking. How deep can I go? What kind of strategies do I use? What reasoning do I use to think through a problem? And does that align with kind of how they like to think through problems and how they've seen successful problems be solved at the company?
So you interviewed there in about 2018. It's 2026. How important is critical thinking today?
I'd say more important than it's ever been.
Yeah. Why?
When I interview people, there's a lot that we can teach, right? Like I can teach you about the business if you've never been in this type of business. I can teach you about the industry if you've never been in tech. What I can't teach is the ability to really think through a problem and be, to our earlier point, creative. We used to say at Google, and I've continued to say that since, but we used to talk about needing athletes, not necessarily an NBA star.
Mm-hmm.
I need someone who can play a game of pickup volleyball and maybe throw a football around and, maybe go swim for a while. I don't necessarily need someone who's the absolute expert at baseball.
Yeah.
And I think that's become more and more important as the speed of change has continued to speed up. We don't know what the next year is going to look like and what we need people to do. And if you've got an organization of specialists, it's really hard to pivot in those moments.
If we don't know what the problems are of tomorrow, how do we forecast problems and headwinds today?
It's a great question. I think everyone's trying to solve that. I wish I had the equation for you, John. I would probably, I need to write a book. I tell you that much. I'd be on stage everywhere.
Right. Well, I think it brings up a really interesting topic of discussion because, what am I resisting? Right? Am I resisting diving into figuring out what that headwind is? Am I resisting listening and talking too much? And I'm missing the whispers and the cues and the tea leaves. I think resistance, which is where I wanted to kind of move this conversation, it's like we have to look at the soft skills, I think, of what we have today. AI can spit out I love AI. I think it's a great tool. I think that it can speed things along. I think for somebody like me who's dyslexic, where I can't necessarily retrieve something that I want to do research on, it can access a part of my brain and say, yes, that's what I it was like on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't get it. And now I can. It allows me to kind of think in a fuller way and then kind of talk to it like an executive assistant. But what it doesn't do is listen to the tea leaves and really forecast energetically what some future headwinds are. And one of the things I think, which I'd like your opinion, is we all have to get a little bit, just piggybacking off of the noise, we have to get a little bit quieter. We have to pause for a moment. We have to wander and get bored for a minute to just download what is, kind of create our own little gap chasm to then kind of like just kind of play in that space to kind of like make stronger maybe assumption sets that have a shorter shelf life, maybe only 24 hours. But I think that's part of the formula, Travis, which is shorter shelf life assumption sets to see how we're making decisions in real time. I don't know. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you make a great point. We talk a lot about failing fast and just like taking in information that we have in this moment and saying, okay, let's go forward with that. Let's see what comes of it. Does it go somewhere? Does it not go somewhere? I think a great example of that, just from my own personal experience, is actually the introduction of Agent Force by Salesforce, where it was introduced, and I don't want to say it was like a almost on the side, but it was something that was within the realm of what I would consider to be a bet, or something that we were working on, and we were showing kind of behind the curtain, and it took off, and it became something that the company was like, this is exactly where people want to go, and they responded to it really quickly. I think Dreamforce was in October that year, and by December, the company had shifted priorities significantly to focus on Agent Force and the AI movement. I think that's so critical. And going forward with some of these assumptions, to your point, to say, let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's see what comes. You never quite know. The customer doesn't even know what they want, right? For tomorrow necessarily. They know what's in front of them, but there's many times where we've introduced products and solutions that customers would have never asked for, but couldn't live without today.
Just keeping on kind of the AI, recent articles point to the CEO of Salesforce, and whether this is a headline, maybe not hiring as many or at all as many engineers back in 2025, and pointing more to hiring more kind of AI tools. And so there is this shift, and we're seeing it in a lot of companies, frankly. But my question is so what type of people get hired at Salesforce now? Is it more strategic thinkers, right? So you enter the AI tools, and then are the people just expected to be more critical thinkers? Like where's that? You've used this a little bit. Where's that playground taking place, of ideas?
Yeah, I can't speak for the whole company, obviously. But for me, as I look at like transformational work that we're doing, and the work that my team's doing, it's a lot about critical thinking. It's a lot about being able to work through ambiguity. That's so crucial, especially in tech and in today's tech world. Anyone that can deal with ambiguity is going to be more successful in that type of environment. But I think the time horizons are shorter, to your earlier point, and so being comfortable with what we might be committed to something for 6 months, and we could totally change that commitment in
I think even Mark talks about like maybe hiring less here, but hiring entry-level jobs, hiring this. It seems to me that that's kind of the landscape of businesses today, right? Like hiring. What I really want to kind of get from this is, I think all companies are ramping up on AI tools, or most are, but they expect more from the people coming in, and you need to be growing your critical thinking skills, and you need to show up to show the skill sets that you can kind of come to the table. I'm just kind of circling this back to your book, and not resist learning. AI can make learning really easy, so take advantage of it. I think, I don't fully know if everyone gets the most out of school that they could. So I think we have to take matters into our own hands. And if I'm applying at a company like Salesforce today, I'm studying, I'm researching, because I think many companies, they're taking the top of the top who can show up and really critical think, because a skill set that maybe 4 years ago worked, if AI can do it, I got to be able to come to the table with something that is something AI can't do, or an essence. So what is the essence that people should not be resisting when it comes to what they need to learn?
Yeah, I think there's an openness that people need to have to not being so, I guess, tied to whatever the job description was that they applied to. And not being afraid to learn. Hey, you know what? That's kind of outside of what I thought this was going to be, but you know what? Let's dive in and let's see what it means. We all have agency. So if that's not going to fit for you long term, okay, then you go find another role or something that fits better. But not being afraid to actually learn about other roles, or riding maybe the wave right now of where your job is going. And I think that's really interesting. And I'm seeing that myself, right? Transformation has completely changed in the last couple of years. And I'm, in my role also evolving with it, saying, okay, how do we ask different questions? How do we think about the way that we engage AI in the flow of our work, and the work that I do specifically? And I think the one thing I would say for anyone, I frequently talk to college students, is if you're entering this, this workforce, and in any way thinking that you don't need to be an expert at having AI in your tool belt or by your side helping to augment your work, you're not going to get very far, because every company right now wants that skill set. Correct. And so having that, no matter what role, is essential.
Right. You still have to show up and explain why you used it, how you used it, what it does, what you do, benefits of both. I mean, you gotta show up. You gotta show up your best self. This is great. I'm a big fan of Salesforce. I think your company is great. I think Mark, as your CEO, has been doing great things for a long time. I mean, I remember watching an episode, I think it was on 60 Minutes, probably 10 years ago now, where he matched when he came. I think, if I remember correctly, it was like he was interviewed, and then it came to his attention that women's salaries for the same position were less than men's, and he made it right by a few $1 million. And he's just a good guy. I mean, I think the company's great. It's helping so many people be so efficient. Your book is helping people understand why they resist, and tools to really tap in to be their best selves, to understand their biology. I think what you're doing is great. What your company is doing is great. And change is not easy, but it is a constant. It is a constant. Quick speed round. A book that's made a big impact on you.
Dare to Lead by Brene Brown.
She's great. She's great. She puts shame and vulnerability on center stage, and she's great. Her work is great. If you could have coffee with anyone, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh God, that's a good one. Honestly, Taylor Swift, big Swift fan, but also I think she's just an incredible businesswoman, and the way she thinks is amazing. She thinks 3 years in advance. I want to know how she does it.
Yeah, I will ask her where she thinks AI is going if you have coffee with her. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Oh, people will do just about anything if you tell them why and for what purpose.
Yeah, clarity. I like it. Last question. One thing everybody can do right now to get over their own resistance is?
When you think about resistance, think of it as a check engine light. When you're feeling it, really dive into what is actually causing that. Where does that show up for me? What is the thing that I think I need the most, and how do I get it?
Yeah, it's great. Tell everybody where they can buy your book, learn more about you, connect with you, etc. Travis.
Absolutely. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Travis Hahler. My website is travishaler.com. And there'll be links, obviously, John, as well, to the book and to my podcast page as well that has some information.
Great. Travis, appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for tapping into the biology of how we resist, and giving some insights into Salesforce and Google, two tech companies that make a big impact on everybody's lives, as does your book. So thanks very much. Think Big Community. If Travis can help you, reach out. If his book sounds good, go buy it. And if you need to talk about any coaching, you can reach me at johndwoskin.com. Travis, this was great. Thanks a ton.
Thank you so much, John.